So this is the first stay video on the Hampden build. Now, the main thing I focused on is adding structural detail. So I've put it in ribs and stringers. On the outside you can quite clearly see where these run. So you've got the runs for the stringers here and the ribs, so it's quite easy to get your line up. It doesn't have to be perfect because you're going to provide an indication, a representation. With the amount of glazing that's visible on this aircraft, it's going to be visible, but it doesn't have to be precise. That's what I would suggest here. This isn't intended as a competition model, it's just intended to have that little bit extra. This part here is the center wing box. Now that is visible. If you look through the nose glazing and past the gunner's position, that does appear clearly, pretty clearly. So I think that does need to be boxed up, maybe a little bit too far back, but not really too bad. So a representation of your center spar, and looking at reference photos, something that does need to be included within this. I'm going to add a few boxes, bits, maybe air cylinders, other bits and pieces like that, or air bottles, fire extinguishers, little detailed parts like that to this interior. Things that can stay in the cockpit green will be in the cockpit green, so probably base coated all in a white or a light grey, and then hit it with the cockpit grey, bearing in mind because it's hidden away inside, there's no internal lighting on this. You can go for a lighter tone, it will make it stand out a little bit more, otherwise it just ends up too much as the dark cave. So lighten this up a little bit, and I'll dress this up with a few more details, but this is the basic starting point on this. That's the other side. I think this side came out a little bit worse, even though I did it second. Cockpit itself coming along. I must make sure not to lose the control wheel. This has already fallen off once. There it is. Pretty basic. Some photo etch to go on there. Instrument panel to get made soon. And the photo etch seat belts. I do sort of feel that with all these lovely photo etch, with all the detail you have with these seat belts, which are great, a few other details. You can see the rudder pedals as well, which is a nice touch, and multi-part instrument panel. The rudder panels can be seen through the front, so yes, they should go on there. A little bit more I think could have been added to this, but it's, for what it is, it's not bad. That's an external aerial to run under the rear fuselage. I believe the HF ring. This part here folds up to make the pedals. So a nice start to this, keeping the Bombay close, so I'm not going to have to worry about that. I say more detailed work to be done on the interior. I might thin out this part because I'm going to want to build the model with the rear gunner's position partly open. That's going to mean cutting the glazing and having it folding back into that area there. Or do I keep it closed up? I don't know. I don't know for that. It might on this one be closed up, save myself some surgery, but certainly I've cut out, now even though this isn't clear on the model, and you will have to look at reference pics here, I've cut out the front hatch. Again, looking at reference pics, I can guess that this opens up inwards, because they basically stop it if the hatch releases when you're you don't want the bomb aim accidentally falling out in flight. So I can see this being an inward opening hatch, split into two parts. That seems to me to be the logical approach. Certainly on none of the reference pics that I see anything sticking out in that direction. So I'm assuming two halves open up in this direction, or maybe one in that. But you certainly don't, if you want to get out quickly, you don't want to be fighting against a slipstream either. So that's going to be opened up. Because if you've got ground crew running fuel pumps, they're going to want access to the cockpit and all the rest of it, and to the front end. So the aircraft's being built in a being refueled config. So, nice start. Having fun with this. I think this might be my first Valom kit. Nothing too unremarkable, and certainly nothing that I would say if you've got a few builds under your belt that I think any modeler can manage this one quite well. Right, update on the Hampden before I close things up. Dressed up the interior quite a bit. Added a lot of different details, oxygen bottles, racks for the Vickers K-gun spare magazines. That would have been the sextant rack at the navigator's position, navigator seat, more Vickers ammunition racks. I used pins to make the supports for the seats. Behind, in the instrument panel, I added detail here for the back face of the instruments, just to busy that up a little bit. On the other face, a little bit less detail. I seem to work on one face. The Vickers K gun racks for the spare drum magazine rack for the dorsal gunner's position. Other bits and pieces that have been reworked on this. I wanted the rear cock, the dorsal position open, so I sliced the glazing, the canopy, so this can be displayed in the open position. So sliced it along that line. So as we see in so many representations of this aircraft or in photos, this part is tends to be open, so it can be posed fundamentally like that. Now what that means is when you look at it, you realize that the interior half, that the the upper half of it, folds back into the fuselage, and in cutting that, okay, that broke, but I've thinned that out, so sanded it and then polished it to make this into 3 sections that will hopefully fit inside here. Now I should also explain early on, I've taken the Dremel and thinned out the plastic in this area, so you would actually see part of like the internal glazing in here, we'd say the edge there, and then as it's come into a folded back position, with your pivot point being about there. So that's what's being done there. Other things, I had to raid the Airfix Jeep set. This one has some rather useful pieces for the 303 caliber machine gun. That's located in the nose but isn't shown in this kit. And in this part of nose glazing, I drilled this hole to take that, so the NG with its ammunition, with its magazine, ammo box, will go in roughly like that. So when you actually see inside, as you would with the actual aircraft, you could see the this mounting inside the fuselage. So that's being prepared to go like that. Also, the other thing, poking out of the lower nose, if you look on these, there was the Vickers K gun off to the side of the bombardment's window, so here, and I've drilled out a hole for that and have liberated one of the Vickers MGs from that set as well to add that to the nose. For the lower gunner's position, if you take a look at your reference photos, that area here was open. Now this was actually had a glazing panel in, that shouldn't be there, so that was cut out and then smoothed up. Now the way I tend to cut glazing is take some good old blue tack, so many uses for this stuff. Then I put whatever the piece of glazing I've got on it. I'll put masking tape along the edges I wish to cut rather than trying to mark it with anything else, and then I use the tape as my guideline. To make this cut here, I used rescribing tool just to get the open up the edge so that when I snapped it off it would fracture in a predictable manner. So you cut that along with a razor saw and you can get a nice clean cut and clean it up. So any canopy glazing cutting, put some blue tack in underneath just to take some of the forces that you're going to apply to avoid it cracking. Another cut I'm going to have to make is I want to have the canopy, the pilot's position open, the cockpit open. So that's going to mean slicing this. Now it's nice that his side windows are separate, so I think if you slice this and then those will attach to there, you should be able to actually display this open relatively easily. Something else I will be doing is these are the two windows for the ventral gunner's position, and before I glue them in I'm going to mask them, because that's a type of, if you put the masking on the inside face and the outside face, it's kind of masking against getting glue fogging. So once that's then secured and cured, I will take the masking off the inside face and leave it on the outside face. So that's what we'll do for that position. So reasonably happy with this. All this work, and maybe I've been taking too long over this and slowed me down a bit. The other thing I have done is also opened up this hatch here, and the pieces I cut out from there I've sanded down. I may actually make fresh ones. I'm not entirely happy with them. They didn't look brilliant, but so they're going to be displayed open, as when you look at a lot of the reference photos, that hatch there is open. It's not obvious often that clear, but it certainly is there. And once I got the fuselage halves together, I will add the frame for the bomb sight. Something else I have made for the rear gun position is using a pin that I bent around the mandrel and then tapped it with a hammer, is the scarf ring for the twin Vickers K guns. So this will fundamentally go in like this, and that becomes the runner for those machine guns in that position. That being quite a visible thing. So dressing this up a little bit, making it pop a little bit more on the inside, and sort of busying it up. Like the photo edge seat belts that have come with this. It's not an excessive photo edge set, but it certainly gives you enough that you can do something with. And so with a little bit of research and a little bit of conversion work, you can really add something. Now I know these black oxygen bottles are a bit overscale, a bit too big, but again, having them there adds a little bit more detail. You know, when you peer inside an aircraft, you expect to see bits, pieces, boxes and other gear, and I think the original kit is a little bit, well, it is lacking in this. So anyway, before we close it up, that's where we're up to. Having fun with it, and certainly enjoying this build process. So Hampden coming together a little bit now after spending all that time on the interior. That's all now closed up, and Fuselage this sort of main structural assembly comes together pretty quick. Things seem to be lining up quite well, but yeah, there's a shed load of issues with this as well. So for starters, this gives you a little pointy thing. You need to put in a block for the tail well to locate on, but in addition to that, this is a butt joint here, and so what I would recommend is I've put in some plastic rod to create more of a socket joint. Otherwise, I think that's a bit difficult position. You want to give it a bit more strength as well. So needs a bit of tidying up. There'll have to be some rescribing. Butt joint again, also for the vertical stabilizers, which will be the undercarriage bay and the engine nacelles. There's no bulkhead on the kit, so use the circle cutter to put in a couple of bulkhead panels here and here, and then that'll get painted green as well. I think that is necessary, or otherwise it's just too see-through on this part looking in this direction. It just doesn't seem right to me. Some people say, well, you could see through it. There would probably be stuff like oil tanks behind the engines and that lot, but I'm not sure about the arrangement for that. So what I've popped in is 2 bulkhead panels, just to close that off a bit. Scarf ring put in there. If we start looking at how some of the glazing's going to go, see, so many Hampdens are photographed with this with the gunner's position open, and that'll probably be with the rest of the canopy folding back into that area there. So I think I've sort of achieved this to the level that I wanted to. Slightly lower there. Looking at this, it seemed to me it was like a one piece that sort of hinged back, and so the glazing would end up sort of behind the gunner as well. So that's the assumption I've made on that. And when you're looking, you can sort of vaguely see the other part of the glazing on the inside face of the fuselage. That's the approach I've taken there. So that, I think, has been quite nice to achieve that. The ventral gunner's position. Oops, that way around. Cut out to look like this. Maybe that edge there needs a little bit of straightening up, but not too much. Once you've got a pair of the Vickers K's poking out, it won't be too noticeable. So reasonably happy again with that. The pilot's position, I'm going to open this up. So it's got like the canopy properly slid back. Yeah, she's a bit of a filler pig. I'm not too worried about this slight lap here on the Bombay doors. They're meant, I think that's meant to be, you kind of want to have your Bombay doors quite a visible seam line there. That to me looks reasonably okay, as it should be. The rest of these getting quite a bit of tidying up. I'll have to check on the way the Hampden was assembled there. I don't think there's a prominent fuselage seam line. Having this bit of spine here really does help cut the it's a reinforcing member or what, but that really does make things easier for the join and cuts down on quite the amount of filling you need to do along there, which is quite good. So it's starting to look like a Hampden now. Reasonably happy that I've got the tail nice and level and the right anhydral on the wings. This joint is the wing root joint. It's a bit of more of a butt joint than anything else. What I don't like is that the flaps end up sitting proud of there. So you have to take the thin out the inside face here to make sure that your flaps sit below this line, below the wing root line. But then that also risks creating more of a step here. So that needs a little bit of blending out, and it'll need some rescribing. So this is a bit of a tricky joint. It's been the good old Tamiya extra thin, and then for filler I've used super glue, because you end up with a gap and you really want to add to that bond, that joint. So super glue, and then some, let it set for a while, then to make sure just paint on a little bit of super glue activator as well. This tail joint's going to need some work around here to smooth that out, and some rescribing as well. But overall, main thing is I think things look reasonably square and aren't skew width, so that's okay. In terms of the flap position, I haven't really seen any images of Hampdens with drop flaps on when they're parked up, so I'm happy enough with the positions of the tail surfaces, and even to leave the elevator in a neutral position as well. That seems okay for me for the purpose of this build. Hatch opened under there. Maybe that's looking a little bit small, but I think it's still wide enough for 1/72 scale crewman with his chest parachute to go diving out in an emergency, and people scrambling around and all the rest of it. Issue I have spotted is the main nose glazing. It is just plain too wide. So what I'm going to do on this is get some boiling water and give this a soak in the boiling water, and then just pinch it a little bit and hold it in position to the right width. I also think it is a little bit skewed off to one side, which doesn't look quite right. So this line here is going to need taking back on this side, because the whole nose skews in that direction slightly. So this face here needs taking back just a little bit without then damaging the seat detail as well. So it's going to be a bit of sanding to do. But then I don't want to throw it out with the forward nose, this part here, which seems actually not too bad. So that's going to have to be done quite, or even packed out, put a tiny strip of shim on that side, which actually may be a better approach. But I'm going to locate this part first, and then build out the frame to locate the bomb sight and equip the bomb sight into that space. So it would go into that area there. Sorry, that's my fan. Rattly old thing. Okay, that's where we're up to. So, a bit more progress and a little bit of a technique discussion about this on what I've been doing on this Hampden. First thing I'd like to discuss is the issue of this glazing being too large. So I've actually got it down a bit, and you can see now there is a lot less overlap than there was previously. I've got it a bit narrower, so there's a step up at the top. So the way I did that was I popped it in this little vise and just pinched it down sufficiently to match this width. I then put boiling water in this jar and put this in there, and I just left it. This is something you don't rush. You just let it soften up naturally and let it take the shape, and then just let it cool down slowly. It's almost like, for those of you who are metal workers, like an annealing process. You don't want to create any stress fractures, So you don't want this to try and to rush it. You don't want to overforce it. I only took it in by, say, what, 1.5, maybe 2 millimeters at most of compression, but that's all that needed. But and it avoided a noticeable step. So it's certainly a tip worth remembering from Canopies. You're not going to change it by much, but you can change it, and it's just letting the plastic soften, letting the long chain molecules realign to the new form you want, and hopefully the plastic you're using doesn't have too much memory in it, in that after going through a heating cycle it can return to its original form. That's material memory. Some materials, polymers, metals, exhibit that, some don't, and I think in this case this one thankfully doesn't, and most model making polystyrenes don't, thankfully, but some may exhibit it to some extent. It's just a case of very gradual, very light forces, just enough, and it pinched it down. Now this now sits quite well on here. The only problem I have got is this side is still further forward, so it's still skewed off in that direction. So other issue has been, I initially tried to fit the vertical stabilizers by just gluing them straight on, and that wasn't a good joint. Very poor butt joint here, even with Tamiya extra thin, and I didn't in this case put a bead of super glue. I'm rather glad it didn't. Well, they did come off. So what I've done is I did a TET joint for where the horizontal stabilizer extends beyond the vertical rudder, vertical fins, and I've now put in pins. Now pinning is something that comes really much from war games, doing war games miniatures, but it does often work in model making applications. So just drilled it through, put a couple of pins in, and you can see here you've got a slot, and this will significantly, might need a little bit of work, but to give a much better joint for this. And then Tamiya extra thin and a bead of super glue as well will give us a good solid joint. And what I can do on the squareness is I might bend these out a little, because this is like a couple of degrees out. So I've used pinning on both sides. That pin there, I'm going to have to shorten that one to help with the vertical flying surfaces. The rest of this I'm reasonably happy. One of my issues as a modeler is keeping things square. I'm actually convinced that this lower part of the fuselage isn't square to the wings. That looks a bit skewed, and I think there actually may be a little bit of misalignment in the molding anyway, but okay. So it's one of the issues I do have is keeping things square, and I'm a horrendous issues with often having wonky landing gear. So pinning certainly does help things, and that's what I've done here. A joint like this, that put in there. I may even put, I'm not sure it needs it now, is filler, or may well just put super glue into this gap, these high viscosity stuff, so it sets slightly slower. Pop this on, super glue bead to fill it, and also Tamiya extra thing, and you'll have, you know, reasonably secured joints. So going to add some detail in the nose, the framework supporting the bomb sight, and then I'll cut a little bit of plastic, paint it black, so I've got something, a little blob that looks vaguely bomb sighty, or something like that. So a little update, reasonably happy with how this is going. There's going to be another unboxing video for the actually going to watch this before them, but there's another unboxing video for the Grand Crew sets as well. Okay. So, another update on this, on the Hampden. I hit it with Cockpit Green as an undercoat. Main reason is that it's similar to the basic chromate green, so it's not our place using it for that, and it'll be in contrast to other tones. Identified more areas of filling. I have to say the fit of the glazing on this is not great at all. It's almost like undersize on the cockpit, it's oversized on the nose, and the tail just doesn't even sit straight. And the ventral position doesn't sit straight. But I suppose it's workable once it's all painted up, bearing in mind these low areas are going to be black anyway, and it's a dark, generally speaking, dark scheme. It's going to hide a lot of sins. The fit here around the nose, I would say, is probably the main issue area. You really do need to do a lot of test fitting for the nose, and I don't think it is as straight as it should be, and that was despite sanding, filling. Gap between the two halves on this axis as well, so that needs filling. It's fiddly one. This part, and I think the navigator's position may have sat proud because of the filling and sanding I did, and I've taken the fuselage down a little bit, so I took that down a portion. Bearing in mind it's going to be partly obscured with the pilot's canopy pulled back anyway. Need to put in some rails along here. So coming along, starting to look like what it's supposed to be. I want to let this filler dry fully before I do any more sanding on it, and use a really fine skinny sanding stick. I used the Revell stuff. I've used Revell and super glue on this mostly. Probably should have done that using the Delux products Perfect Putty, then just wiped it off. That might have been a better option, but I also needed something with a bit of stick to it as well. I may use the Delux products just along this gap here, because that should be far better blended in with the fuselage. So I'll get this sanded, get it reworked, and see what it looks like. This joint doesn't seem too bad. It's visible, it's prominent, but it should be there. Simple as that. You know, that's like a natural joint for where the wings would have gone onto the fuselage. So I'm not too worried about the wing root joint in this case, as it seems quite appropriate for where it is. Something I added that is the Vickers K-gun in the nose. There. I hope I don't break that off. Drilled out the holes for the aerials in the vertical stabilizers, and then there'll be 2 more holes in the fuselage here to wire into the radio. So they'll be from the pillar across to here, and then 2 secondary wires to feed into the radio itself. That'll be one of the last things done on this model. I say it's starting to come together now. I actually think the painting on this is going to be relatively easy. Then I'll have a little bit of fun with decaling and the marking, and then after that wiring. So overall, not too bad. I've been looking at picture frame bases for it. I have to take some measurements and then pop to get a suitably sized one. So yeah, pretty happy. It's going to look like what it's meant to look like. So I have to admit, at this stage, I think I kind of lost track of it a little bit with the taking photographs and videos and such. So what you have here is I've got the dark green down and I've got the flat brown down, and I was struggling with that brown. I couldn't get this to a shade I wanted. I didn't want it to be too light or too dark, and I think it still came out in my mind too dark. So that's the XF-71, the XF-63, 68 olive green, and the XF-10 flat brown I used, and then try to lighten up the brown a little bit with a bit of post shading or post lightening. They went down okay, no significant issues, no particular problems with the masking. And I did something that is quite unusual for me, that I actually freeballed, freehanded this camouflage. Normally I'm there with the masking and all the rest of it, and this time I tried outline and then filling in. So that's why the edges on this are a bit more feathered than they normally are. It's just not my normal typical technique. And so now in the second pick you can see the decaling, and I did use a mix of the kit decals and some Airfix decals. Their main letters were some overflow letters I had. I think they're from a Hurricane. I can't honestly remember when I built one, but they just happened to be decals I had. So just reversing the first two letters to give me, I believe it's 42 Squadron W4 Whiskey, so the EA and the EA markings, and I'm quite happy with the way that lot went down. Getting them lined up correctly was a little bit of a headache. I couldn't really work out whether the roundel should stay lined up with the other side and the letters be misaligned from side to side, or the other way around. So it's somewhere in between the two. Went down with microset and microsole. Quite happy with the way the wing decals went on. They weren't excessively transparent, so can't complain about the Valom decals. Decided not to use the Valom serials, and because the serial is like tucked near enough under the tail, I didn't worry too much about it. After that, it was weathering with the Tamiya weathering powders and some oil washes, and not too heavy on the panel line wash because it's such a dark aircraft already. I didn't think it needed a panel line wash. More than anything else, it needed a little bit of lightening up with the weathering powders and some oil staining. Again, not too heavy. And then on the wing roots and the high use areas, just some light paint chipping using metallic coats, finish paints, very, very lightly applied to take up where ground crew and air crew would have their access path on the aircraft. So that really brings us through to the painting, and again at this stage I kind of lost track a little bit on the need for photos and videos. So the next video clip is going to be the final build, and we'll discuss the aircraft, the ground crew, the base, and that side of it. So here we are with the completed Handley Page Hampden. I must admit, this build took longer than I would have wanted it to, and I kind of fell behind on the recordings. So there's going to be, I apologise that there's a little bit of a gap on this, but we'll certainly go through where we've arrived at. As you can see, it's based on I've used a picture frame for my base. That tends to be my preferred approach, and it does seem to work moderately well. These are picture frames with an MDF backing. The flock is different tones and textures mixed together with some sawdust added in as well. And once I'd got that basic Hampden together, I was able to look at its dimensions and then find a frame that I felt suited it, and I really try and have an aircraft. And this is actually positioned slightly further forward than I would have wanted it, but that I was originally planning. I don't like overlapping like that, but it looks okay in this case. So it's been created in a refueling setting. I had thought of using the RAF Bomber Command resupply set, but I ended up using the old Airfix refueling set, and in this case just the Bedford QL from this set and 3 of the figures. I didn't want to over busy this, and I'd rather use that set for a planned Wellington project, so that was my reason for going for an older one that I had in the stash. Bedford QL tanker, I think it's still a reasonable little kit. Goes together reasonably well. You do need to pay attention to seams and flash. You do need to cut some, get some clear plastic card to make your own windscreen for it, and you do also need to add your own hosing. Now I know it's maybe even be described as a little bit short of detail on the top. The fuel hoses are actually made out of fuse wire, 13 amps, so it's the thickest fuse wire I had, and it seems to fit in quite well. Takes a little bit of work to bend it to the right shape, but it looks to scale, and it seems to have come out fairly appropriate. The aircraft itself, my main problem with this as a build is that my shade of brown that I've used for the two-tone camouflage scheme is just too dark. I should have used a lighter shade, and that is my main bugbear about this whole build. But by the time I'd got the camouflage scheme on this one, I was thinking, should I change it or not? So that's my only significant issue with this. And as always, my aerial rigging is a little bit on the messy side, particularly at the post. That is just a little bit more of a blob there than it should be. Figures paint up really well. There's two of them from the refueling set, those two, and I've used a figure from the Daypole set, Daypole trackside figure set. He needs a little bit of work to reshape his hat so it looks like an RAF service side cap. This aircraft has had a lot of hacking to it. The cockpit canopy is opened up. I'm a little bit pissed off that when I secured it with glue, I've smeared it underneath, so that is a bit of a glaring issue for me, but there we are. And I've lost a little bit of the front here, but effectively this part was separated from here. The rear cockpit required quite a lot of surgery on the glazing to get that in that opened up condition, and I also had to do some hacking on the ventral position as well to have the guns in a state where they can be actually poking out. Now this is where you make hoping your so you can see briefly there that the two ventral Vickers are actually poking out, and that means you had to cut out the front of that panel to enable that. The cockpit has been dressed up quite a bit, and there is, as well as the structural elements, I put in a bomb sight, I put in the framework supporting the bomb sight, and I did actually have originally the Vickers K poking out the front, but that sort of disappeared inside during the masking process and painting process. So there was meant to be a Vickers K pointing like downwards out the front there, maybe just to give the bomb aimer something to do. I think this is a scene captures in my mind what a Hampden is about. Certainly captures the line of the aircraft, and I think the Valom kit is, yeah, a step above the old Airfix kit. But I think if Airfix were to re-release this or do a new issue Hampden, it would be a significant step above the Valom kit, and it's almost to the point where I actually think the Valom kit's a little bit disappointing in that sense. Now there's going to be a whole load of photos, and this is one of those cases where I take a load of photos, post stuff on the web, so show as a complete, and then think, oh shit, I've forgotten something. And in this case, I have added, in between the photos you see, I did realise I'd forgotten the oil stains. Now, this is what Claire, the Warbird Mistress, mentioned in an online discussion, that radial engines, they don't leak oil, they mark their territory. And I think if you do have a diorama with an aircraft with radial engines, making sure you put oil stains, visible oil stains is something that you need to remember to do. Maybe I've overdone it there a little bit, I'm not sure, but so you'll find that you're wondering why there's oil stains here but not in the photos that you'll see in the photo series. It's just one of the things I thought, oh shit, I forgot my oil stains. The rigging wire was fishing line. I need to get myself some EZ line. I do look on Handley, can't seem to find it, and it's one of the things I do look out for at model shows. And I have my usual headaches of manipulating super glue with that and all that business, but you know, the rigging seems to be there at a reasonable level. Weathering not excessive on this aircraft, but I used Tamiya weathering powders mostly and a little bit of oil wash in a few places, but nothing too heavy. I just didn't really want to overwork it. So you've got where the crew would have taken made their axis, that area, and where the ground crew would be busy walking along the wing route. That certainly needed mucking up. And I believe these to be the fuel filler caps for the fuel tanks here and here, here and here. And with that ground crewman, I've actually cut a hole in it, and I used a little thin bit of sprue that I cut into thin slice to give us the little panel he's removed, or the little hatch he's removed, so he can pump the fuel on. Now, shortcoming of this is there should be someone sat in the cockpit looking at the fuel gauges. And I think that is a shortcoming of this particular model, but I wanted to have this is one of the few cases I did want to have an opened up cockpit, and looking down into this, you can see down into the radio operator's position, the navigator's position. That would be when he'd take readings with the sextant through that hatch there, and then he works his way down into the bomb aimer's position. There's a access behind the pilot. I think, you know, when you build a kit of this aircraft, you do really realise the comments. Nice aircraft to fly, but not a nice aircraft to fly in. But the lines, the character of the Hampden are certainly captured in this model, and all credit to Valom for doing so. This aircraft, the QL tanker, again, old kit, but I think it still holds up. And if you're willing to take your time over it, I think you can get a reasonable little build out of this. Ironically, this was mostly hand painted. I struggle with Revell paints, blasting them through an airbrush, and so all the yellow was was hand painted on there, and I must admit, as was the blue. I just did this in multiple layers and built it up over a little bit of time. Chocks were just plastic sprue, square section, and then cut down into triangles. Those I think really do need to be there if you're doing an aircraft on a hard standing. Chocks, you know, tend to be hanging around until before things start trundling away on the next sortie or test flight or whatever. So I think there's something, if you've got an aircraft on a base, in my mind it's something worth remembering. Access ladder, that was just scratch built, plastic card cut into thin strips, put together. If you look at reference photos, there's always people scampering around on this aircraft, and you'll see ladders, normally ones made from tubular steel, to gain access, lying against the trailing edge to give people access up onto the wing. This one is a little bit chunkier, but I don't think it looks too far out of scale. Maybe they just had to go for a wooden ladder that they had in the hangar. So overall, I'm happy with this. This is for the Saturday night crash, the Bomber Command Group build, and I'm happy with the end result. Took me longer than I would have wanted. Most of the time I spent on this, I spent on it during weekends. And and I think it still falls into the 40 to 60 hours of total modelling time spent on this, which to me is, I think, fairly reasonable. The can't have the word Hampden there because I did try it with a decal, but it actually came apart on me. So it's just got the RAF roundel. If I want an extra sticker on there, I'll have to put the words, I'll have to get Hampden printed up and applied on there. So, had fun with this. Like how it's turned out for the most part, apart from the tonal issues. And I think it's certainly a kit worth doing. It makes a nice change from my normal subject matter. And last year I built the Blenheim for a Saturday Night Crash group build for Pacific Theatre, and I'm happy with this as my entry into the group build, for the Bomber Command group build. I'm happy with how this has turned out. It's characterful. It's not perfect. There's stuff I know I could add or do to it, or add to it, but it's there and it's close enough. So thank you for watching. Thank you for following. Chancellor North Wales signing out.